it provided so much healthy conflict about what is the bigger impact, because you can't just do it based on 1,000 people came to worship night and 1,000 people are in groups. Which one's the bigger impact?
Well, hey everyone, welcome to the Intentional Churches podcast. My name is Erin Johnston, and I'm here with my good friend, as usual, Doug Parks from Intentional Churches. Hi, Doug.
Erin, great to be with you, and can't wait for this conversation with Allie. It's going to be awesome today.
We are also here with Allie Bryant. If you have not listened to our live recording from the Intentional Churches conference, you should go back a couple podcast episodes and listen to that one. Allie was a part of that conversation. And we just wanted to kind of double click on some of the things that she said. And so, Allie, before I go any further, would you just tell us who you are, what you do, where you live, all those basic things?
Yeah. So I live in Indianapolis, Indiana, and I have been on staff at Traders Point Christian Church for about 10, actually now 11 years. And so I have been in a couple different seats. I started in marketing and graphic design, so that is like my heart. And now I sit on our executive team. My title is Strategic Alignment Executive, which is a very churchy title. And I got a lot of like head tilts when I say that title. But really what I focus on is really the gap we see a lot of times in churches between strategy and execution. So I want to make sure that we are getting kind of the right work done in order to advance our mission. So to me, it is process and systems, and I love that. And so I'm excited to hop into our conversation today.
Yeah, well, in this season of the podcast, we're trying to just get our arms wrapped around questions that church leaders are asking. And I think maybe one of the biggest things that church leaders probably get frustrated with, the things that they run up against, are actually the things that your job focuses on, which are these issues around alignment, particularly around projects and calendars, and then prioritization and sequencing of, what things do we do when, and how do we use our resources to accomplish like our mission and our vision? How do all those things line up with our strategy? There's a lot to organize. And I think many people get into ministry because they love people, right? And they want to serve people well. And then when you join a church staff, many times you realize, wow, there's like way more strategy and way more projects and way more calendars than I ever signed up for. So I want to jump into this conversation, especially for our listeners who are just like, okay, back all the way up. What do we even mean by strategic alignment? What are we even talking about when we say that? If you could just give us your most simple definition of strategic alignment, how would you define that for us?
Yeah. So I want to step back one step. So we define kind of operating system, if you will, into 4 different categories: mission, vision, strategy, and execution. And I think we all can agree any corporation work scenario has a mission or a vision. We're very familiar with those terms. With strategy, a lot of times, and I think that is like a buzzword that everybody uses, but for us, it's how we're going to accomplish kind of where we're going with the vision. And then really, why do we exist, which is the mission. So that gap where you see those bottom 2 buckets of strategy and execution, that's where strategic alignment fits. So we want to make sure that the work that we're doing aligns to our strategy in order to advance our mission. So if I had a whiteboard and a PowerPoint and people could see it, you would see those 4 buckets, and then you would be able to kind of double click into each of them to see our processes and our systems and how we actually accomplish the vision. How do we actually plan out the vision, and how do we actually kind of communicate around the strategy? There would be tools, tactics, all those things within those. Strategic alignment really is looking in between those boxes to make sure that we're kind of all moving in the right direction. So like the age-old saying of like rowing, I'm not a rower, but like rowing in the right direction, right? You got so many people on the boat, you want to make sure you're all going in the right direction.
Yeah, that's really good. Doug, I would love, this is kind of where Intentional Churches lives, is trying to help people think well about this. And so I'd love for you actually to maybe toss another question Allie's way as you think about this, as you think about the issues that you run into as you travel the country and encounter many churches. What would you think a question is that church leaders are asking, particularly around what Allie does?
I'm going to ask one they should be asking, but usually aren't. And that
Great.
is the discipline around definition. And I love that every time I talk to Allie, she's just holding up the banner of consistently saying, this is the definition. The two words that I see all the time confused in teams are strategy and vision. And staff will say the vision's not clear. And the senior leader or communicator will be incredibly frustrated because they're like, I preach on vision basically every week. I'm saying, here's the people we're becoming.
Mm-hmm.
What do you mean? Well, they were actually meaning I'm not clear on what our big bucket strategy hows are in the next run. And so that conversation I find adds a lot of frustration in especially senior leaders and staff members down and in. So Allie, the question for you is, what are ways that you and the team are making sure those definitions stay clear? And give us maybe an example of when it's been muddied and what was the negative. So
Yeah. Okay. Oh, so many thoughts here because we are still tweaking and learning because like any process or system, you're always improving it. Like you always want to do an iteration, like loop around it, right? You always want to make sure it's getting better. So as much as I would love to say that our strategic calendar, everybody understands it, everybody knows where we're going, that's not the case. And we've been running it since 2019. It was our first vision initiative project that we kind of launched, to use intentional church language or like big rock in the organization. We were like, okay, we got to get aligned around the weekend. We know sermon series are coming every weekend. We know this month is going to be geared towards the new person because it's August, right? We all understand the waves of ministry. Specifically in August and January, we see that in the Midwest. And then it kind of tears off with fall breaks and spring breaks because we're a big suburbia church. So all to say, like, we knew our calendar, but we just had to get really, really disciplined to see kind of not be reactive, but to be proactive because Sunday's always coming. And so you got to look beyond that and to be able to kind of strategically plan. To answer your question, Doug, that was our biggest win, getting a strategic calendar and a strategic rhythm so that all of our staff, no matter where you sat, knew where we were at least trying to go in the next 6 months. That provided clarity. I will say where we've gotten still muddy. So where it's still really muddy is we consistently see people throughout our organization. And just for a little bit of context, we have 170 on staff, 135 full-time. So that being said, it gets very, very difficult to speak to each job and say exactly how they are contributing to the mission. So a lot of times we leaned into our strategy to do that. And so I think there's a miss there. We constantly are having to clarify because that's what we all want. We all want expectations of what's going to be expected of us, and especially how we're going to advance the mission. And so I think it's not only clarifying. I think, Doug, you're absolutely correct in saying that clarity is kindness, right? Clarifying, definition, all that. Double click into that and always ask then, what does that mean for me? Because that's what everybody's asking. And so I think the more that we kind of create these rhythms, these disciplines, we are always asking ourselves, how does this affect, the facilities person? How does this affect the kids person? Like, and making it kind of, make it personal to them, if that makes sense.
Oh, I think that is so good because the kind of hedge that Doug raised that he hears in churches, like the vision isn't clear or whatever. I think the question people are actually asking is what you just said, Allie.
Yep.
I don't know what to do in my work week that makes any difference towards what that person is saying to our church on the weekends.
And a lot of times, not to cut you off, Erin, but like a lot of times you have the senior, whatever, leadership executive team, whoever it is, they are so clear on the vision, right? Like they're like, we know where we're going. Like, this is awesome. And there's just misunderstanding and miscommunication that has to transfer all the way down to the person who's, filling out the paychecks every week or all the way down to execution. And that gap in the middle, a lot of times, times is where it just gets misunderstood in strategy. And so that's for me, a lot of times that's that translator. That's that translator of taking vision down to execution. And so I think the more that you can try to think like that, if you're in a room of all visionaries, who is your like implementer, activator, whatever language you want to use, who is that person who's going to take that vision and make it happen down into the organization?
Yeah, that's really good. And that matters for churches of any size. Even if you have a staff of 5 people, the senior leader is going to have a vision. And how does the rest of those 5 staff members know what they are to do in that direction? How do you do that, Allie? Like, how do you help the people that are super concrete? Like, I call them our concrete thinkers, the people that basically are like, I just need you to tell me what to do. Because some people can take a vision and they love to think like that. They love to iterate and figure out what that means. And some people are like, I don't want to brainstorm about that. Just tell me what it means and I'll do it. Yeah. So how do you help bring that down to all different types of thinkers?
Yeah. So a question I try to always ask, and I always frame up whenever you're casting anything, right? Like you frame up what you're going to say, right? Like communication 101. You tell people what you're going to say, you say it, and then you say it again, right? And so a lot of times if I'm framing it up, I will say something like, I'm assuming that you need to know the why we're making this change. I'm assuming that you and so you're basically asking them, like, what do you need? I'm assuming you need the why here for 20 minutes and we're going to sit in why this change is coming. But if you don't and you just want to be told what to do, then we can move on past that. So it's just even like setting up the right conversation. I've sat in my seat since 2020. So I've been in this seat for all 4 years. Still to this day, and I've worked with a lot of the same people, some different people, but still to this day, I think it's even having the conversation before the conversation, like having the conversation on the approach, on how I'm going to approach this change or implement this thing, and making sure the right people are in the room at the right time. I really do think it comes back to like the stakeholder conversation to make sure you have the right, whatever you're trying to decide. If you're trying to make a decision, if you're trying to cascade it, and just be clear about this. This is a decision that has already been made. This is where I want your input. And there's a lot of different communication techniques you can use for that.
Yeah, that's great. That's super helpful. How do you guys think about, because part of this strategic alignment conversation, I know for me in my context is also a big issue comes up in prioritization and sequencing. And what do we do first? And when do we do it? And what order? And what gets our resources now? And what gets our resources later? And that has the potential to be a real unifying thing. If you can get unified around your sequencing of things, it also has the potential to really derail you if people disagree on the order of prioritization. And so how are you thinking about in this whole strategic alignment conversation in mission, vision, strategy, execution? How are you thinking about prioritization and sequencing?
Yeah. Okay. So you're like speaking my language here. So this is great because this happens every single day. Everybody has so many ideas and heart for ministry and all the people, but not enough time and resources to do it. So how do you make sure that your prioritization process is keeping you aligned to your mission and vision, but also like letting God lead, right? Like you never want to handcuff your people so that they can't do their job or do what God has put on their heart as far as ministry. So I would say 2 things. First, to go back to what Doug said, definition. If you can define first the work that is getting done, you can then prioritize it. So if you can't define it, you can't prioritize it because then you're saying yes or no without knowing the trade-off conversations you're actually making. So if you can define, so just like, and you can define, we went down this route, we define by 2 types of work. It's either static or dynamic. So basically you have work that is static, that is every Sunday it is coming. Every year we do Christmas. Every year we do Easter. Every weekend the kids ministry has to get the volunteers going. Like that is work that is just repeatable and ongoing and usually within a defined scope. So scope means basically quality, time, and cost. It's kind of like the definition of work. The other side is dynamic. Those are things that have a different scope or changing or something new. We want to launch a new campus in this area that we've never launched before. We want to try to do a marriage night, which we've never done before. It's something that has a very different scope and probably has a very different lift because you've never done it. So we first define that. So then when I come to you, whether you're a manager or whoever, and I say, hey, we want to do this new thing, we can then look at our work and even just have the trade-off conversation. So it's just one step further in defining work. The second definition I would do, if you can define impact, because we all know the reason for any type of work is to provide an impact because we want to impact people's lives, right? And so if you've ever heard of the Eisenhower matrix, so it's like a matrix, like 4 quadrants. But basically what you do with the Eisenhower matrix, it's to always kind of see where you're at versus like important versus urgent. So we did the exact same thing, but impact versus work. So we plotted everything that was on our strategic calendar up there and had great conversation because you all of a sudden have the discipleship guy being like, well, highest impact, rooted. We have to do discipleship groups. That is the highest impact. It doesn't take much work. We've done it for years, and then you have, the worship guy, worship night. That's the biggest impact. We have to get people, it provided so much healthy conflict about what is the bigger impact, because you can't just do it based on 1,000 people came to worship night and 1,000 people are in groups. Which one's the bigger impact? Well, deep and wide, right? We have thousands of people come through our indoor playground. We have no idea who they are because it's top of the funnel, right? So it led for such a good conversation that you can't just base impact on numbers. You just can't base impact. It's like, how do you do numbers and impact and depth of spiritual walk?
Yeah,
does that make sense? Anyways,
we're in the spiritual transformation business.
Yes.
You could have all the numbers in the world and not be transforming someone's heart.
Right,
so
exactly.
It's like we got to get our head around it.
Yeah. So definition of those two things, I would just say that's just like a step maybe to have a prioritization conversation.
That's great.
I think, Erin, our learning is, I would say this statement, and some people may take me to task on it, but I believe the greatest headwind you face in church leadership, every church leader faces, is misalignment. And the reason why you have misalignment is because you have no unified framework by which you are prioritizing and sequencing, like what Allie's talking about. And what we identified with being with churches, because I've not found a church yet that really has done this really, really well. We all devolve down into these, what we call the poor evaluation standards, where it all becomes about opinion. It's subjective. It becomes about getting better in comparison, and the maybe a little passive aggressive anecdotal story where I can justify any ministry program or usage because we don't have an aligned framework. So for me, when I get into a prioritizing and sequencing conversation, that is the muscle that I'm trying to build inside of a team, the ability to rally around a true north. This is where God has our church heading. And because of that, then, of these 10 things we could do, what is the first thing we should do in sequence? And I love the Eisenhower. I've always been a fan of the Eisenhower matrix, and using that kind of thinking with an aligned framework like a true north allows you then to not just be in matters of opinion and a little less subjectivity in the conversation.
Yeah, I agree. That's one of the rhythms and disciplines we installed with the strategic calendar, was evaluating our strategy on a monthly and quarterly basis. I can't say enough about a red, yellow, green. Anytime you can put, let's just, normal stoplight, red, yellow, green. When something is red, it's this. When something, we need to fix it right away. If something's yellow, it might be teetering towards, red. Where is it trending to? And then when something's green, things are going great. Okay. But I would just say that just having that rhythm of conversation also puts it in front of mind, so that because it's going to come, when the new idea comes, then you can say, you know what? we're really struggling with getting people into groups right now, we do need to have this type of event or whatever to do that.
Allie, how do you guys think about, as you're having these strategic conversations, you're working to get aligned, there's like the highest level of this conversation, which is, planning for the year and kind of the big buckets. And as church leaders, I think we're always having to figure out, like, what are our rhythms of planning? What are our rhythms of listening well to God together? What are our, all the rhythms that begin to form this strategic calendar and things like that. How do you guys think about like the regular day-to-day coordination of your strategy? Because what I have found is the biggest run-ins that we're going to find that are usually the things that start small that become big. It's the everyday little thing, day-to-day stuff that all of a sudden we have some major collision in the calendar or in terms of the work that's required. And all of a sudden we've got 2 teams on our staff that are doing incredibly heavy lifts because we didn't coordinate well. And how are you thinking about, and for our listeners, like, we should be regularly coordinating all the work and aware of the work. How do you think about the practice of coordination? It sounds simple. It's way, way not simple.
So this is a safe area. So can I share this past week what has happened? And it's not a big deal, but it's like, how did we miss this?
Yes, okay. I would love that. Okay. I need my own episode for stories like that.
Okay,
so yes.
Great. There's so many. Let me just tell you, like, there's so many. And it really is like learning as you go. I have a few. This first one is an example from this week. So this past weekend was Mother's Day. And so in May around Indianapolis, it is a big month. So you start off, we end with the race. It's Memorial Weekend, the Indy 500. Like, we got tons of people in town. We have Mother's Day in there. We got graduation. We got proms. We got everything going on right now. We are also in the midst of updating our bathrooms at our broadcast campus and painting the exterior of our building. So literally this weekend, Mother's Day, and there is plastic on all the windows. Half the building is painted. And we're just like, this is like a year-long process we've been planning. But you know what did it? Rain. We were supposed to be done a week ago. And because of the rain, it delayed it. So that's what you're absolutely right. Like, you can plan until like God laughs and he's like, ha ha ha, just kidding. Like, you thought this was a priority. This is not a priority, right? Yeah. I mean, take any crisis management that comes into your city where you have to like act like that. Like, at the end of the day, we are the church and we want to love people very, very well. And so I think that's, as long as you have, and I kind of jumped over it in our process, the values of who we are and who we are in the city and who we as staff are come above sometimes strategy. Like, sometimes, right, you can plan how you do something until a funeral calls or a wedding happens. I mean, it's just the business that we are in. And so even like, we have a language with around our strategic calendar, and it really is led, I would say, when we launched that, not to keep coming back, that's just a tool. So don't overthink, like, all of these are just tools to have the right conversation. We were led really by our lead pastor's rhythms. Okay, when does he plan his next sermon series? And he was led by what we saw with our people coming back at beginning of school year. Everybody's back in the saddle, beginning of the year. Like, we really did look at who was coming in our doors and when they were coming in our doors. So I think that's just starting there and just being very realistic and knowing, hey guys, the couple weeks before Easter, not the best time to strategically plan because we're all focused on Easter. Like, you just kind of have to find those actual rhythms and just be real with yourself on what that is. But as far as the like competing things, you can plan, and then and it was fine. Mother's Day was beautiful. It was great.
No rain. There was no rain.
No rain. It was no rain. It was beautiful out. Still tons of people came. Moms got, honored. Like, all the things happened. It was just one of those things that I was like, this is not a great look. Like, we just did not think this through. But as you said earlier, Sunday's always coming. So like, how do you even plan for updates and those type of things with Sunday?
Yeah. Hey, I want to ask you one more question. And that is, one of the things that, honestly, over the years, intentional churches made an assumption with a lot of churches, church leaders, that has proven not to be true. And now we're going back and correcting. And that is the pastorate and church leaders have rarely, if ever, been taught project management. Like, we assumed that skill set was in churches, and it led to some projects that would. And the way we build projects is a lot cross ministry. Even at IC, we're organized as a team of teams a lot more than a hierarchical structure, and so what we've gone back and are doing is now we're actually training as many people as we can, having apprenticing and everything else going to teach project management. I'm saying all that to say, Allie, I know you have spent a lot of time, because at the end of the day, you can't lead and execute every project. What are you doing to develop the next generation of like team leaders or project leaders at
Yeah.
Traders?
Yeah, I would say, and you can interchange that first word project with process, with event, with, I mean, it really is management is what you really want to get down to in the teaching of management. So I think a lot of times, because even when we say project management, process management, portfolio management, those are all very like business marketplace terms that probably have way more technical knowledge, if you will, than a lot of churches. So what I've found, like anything, there's an art and science to it, right? And so like with project management, we are probably pretty significantly 70% art. Know people, know how to communicate, EQ, like just know how to run a meeting, like know how to take action steps and follow a template. Like that's a lot. It's not finding the best way to run agile and sprints and you name it, like Scrum and like all those, whatever the software you're using. It's not that technical. It becomes way more, I think, about relationally connecting and truthfully accountability. Like some of these terms that we all, the skill set, the soft skill set that we all have, we just need to like flex that muscle a little more. So truthfully, a lot of times just looking even internally within staff and as we go through interns, people within the church, anybody who really leans more towards execution or administration. And I'm not saying just likes to sit at a desk, put their head down and like get stuff done. Love those people. They're amazing. I'm talking about somebody who can go down to that level and can go up and sit in an executive meeting and can hear something and then put it into a bullet point list. So the thing I like to say is I love it when I can walk into a room and there's whiteboards and you dump everything up on the whiteboard and it's a can full of worms and you walk out with a bullet point list of who's doing what by when. Like that's what project management really is. It's just phasing out how you drive to execution. And so I do think, and we've come a long way, we still have some room to grow. But there for the longest time, we were even saying, I need to hire a project manager. When truthfully, as we all know in churches, the money is not endless and we really don't have overhead for constant staff. You really don't need to hire a project manager. You might need to develop somebody like a groups leader or somebody within your staff that has more of a slant towards getting stuff done. They could become your like quote project manager. So I think we've gotten really creative in that way and really just kept to training towards those soft skill sets, like I mentioned, not necessarily just somebody who can run a tool.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? Like run a software.
I think that's super wise. And I've seen all kinds of creativity out on the road. Like some of these cross ministry teams. Now I've got a couple churches where it's a privilege to lead one. It means you're being developed and like they have an application process. I have another church that does, if you're leading one of these, they actually reward you like with some gift certificates or different things. Like, so they're trying to develop this culture of execution because there is a huge gap in church leadership. No pastor has ever been trained in execution, right? Unless they were in marketplace somewhere,
Right. And that was something that I noticed walking into meetings. I was the one a lot of times asking, well, what are the next steps out of this meeting? What are the action steps? And I remember getting weird looks of like, we don't think like that. And I was like,
No.
well, we
talked
should
about
start
it.
thinking like that.
We talked about it. That's good enough.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Like we just did like the circle loop of like constantly talking about it. I was like, great, but what's like actually happening?
Right.
And so that's the thing is like, you don't have to be the perfect project manager, but being a translator, again, that ability to go up and get the vision and then cast down into like a phased approach, I think is gold in the churches and missing a lot of the times.
Yeah, it's so good. We are running out of time here. Allie, I love to finish our episodes with just a simple question, which is for our listeners, I know it's the heartbeat of intentional churches that we would have some just real practical steps that people could take, that they could listen to the podcast, be helped by it, and take a practical step. And so what would be the first 1 or 2 steps that you would encourage our listeners to take if they're seeking greater strategic alignment, if they're seeking a better plan for how they prioritize? You talked about different terminology. You've talked about a lot of things. If a listener was going to take 1 or 2 action steps out of this episode, what would those be?
Yeah, I think it comes back to even starting with your higher points of leadership, whoever that is, whether it's department leaders or whoever you decide to be in the room, and starting just with asking, what is our mission? And have everybody write it down. Like no group think, no like talking. And then the next step, everybody say, okay, what is our vision? And have it write it down and just go around and point to them. Okay, share. Okay, share. Like just to see how aligned are you? Like it's great when you're all in a room and somebody writes it and up on the board and they're like, yep, that's our mission. But when you are asked by yourself with no prep work and in a moment, and not to like call people out and shame them, like that's not what we're doing here. But even down to like strategy. And what is our strategy? And could you explain it in 2 minutes? Like just start there. That gives you your baseline on where you're at. And then you can build into, okay, we need to clarify this. Okay, we need to clarify this. I do think if you are not having some type of strategic planning, whether it is quarterly, biannually, is that the word? Twice a year, or once a year, like whatever that discovery looks like for you, where you are not thinking about this Sunday that's coming and you are thinking about 6 months, 12 months, put a timetable on it. What is your strategic planning process? And that really, by us putting a tool like strategic calendar around our strategic planning process, really started the conversation for us around what are we doing? Strategic alignment, really. Like that's what started the conversation.
That is great. Wow. So much goodness here. Allie, I feel like we are kindred spirits in a way.
Good.
We could probably talk about this for a long, long time. So grateful. Listeners, I would just encourage you to just take even just a first step, like Allie has talked about. Put your people in a room, whether that's 3 of you or 100 and however many of you there are, to just start to get clarity. And as Doug said, like, I think there are ways to find our way and navigate this headwind that church leaders face of misalignment. And I just think we can all work towards greater alignment. And as church leaders, that is our responsibility. Not the only one, but one of our responsibilities to work towards greater alignment together. So, Allie, been such a gift to have you on the podcast today. Thanks for jumping in with us. Doug, as always, so fun to hang out with you. And to our listeners, thanks so much for tuning in to the Intentional Churches podcast. We'll see you soon.
Thanks, guys.